Hello and happy Thursday, friends. We are so delighted that you are joining us for our conversation today with Nikiah Campbell and Demarcus Merritt. My name is Lee Miles, and we'll be going over some introductions soon, but I am one half of the Manifesting Inclusion team, which we'll talk more about. We're going to hop directly into some house rules as we're getting started. So, first things first, today we ask that if you're engaging with us, you'll see a couple of icons at the bottom. You'll see some hand claps, you'll see some hearts, you'll see some emojis. Please engage with us during this conversation. Our guests love to see that you're hearing, having that conversation with us, and we really appreciate to know that you're liking what we're doing. Next, you'll see a little arrow at the bottom. That means share. So we ask that you please press share. Not to only share this message, today we're going to be talking about creating authentic relationships with students, faculty, staff, or for your colleagues if you work in a private or public sector space. And so we just ask that you let them know that you're engaging in this learning opportunity with us and also spreading the message that inclusion matters, and we hope to manifest that together. Last but not least, there will be a portion towards the end of the show to where you can drop questions for the panelists to engage with today. If at any point you like what they're saying, you have a question, you have a comment, something really rattles your spirit, drop that down in the comments below. And so, if you all are ready, we are going to hop into our wonderful conversation today. So, my name is Lee Miles. I'm one half of the Manifesting Inclusion founding team. I use she and they pronouns, and I currently work as the Associate Director of Inclusive Excellence at Wake Forest. And with this Manifesting Inclusion project, we are really excited about helping you all reimagine and realize inclusion. I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Dr. Laura Gonzalez, to talk more about Manning and also more about what she loves to do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. As Lee said, my name is Laura Gonzalez. I use she and her pronouns. I was previously a faculty member at UNCG, which is an experience, a place that we all have a little bit of contact with in this group here, so that's nice. But now I am doing some educational consulting, primarily looking at educational experiences of immigrant and refugee students and how to support, bolster, and help them flourish. Um, Manifesting inclusion is something that is really important to me because it is a community that Lee and I are trying to create, and we're so excited to have you here today as part of that community. This community includes both these speaker series as well as some in-person conference presentations, and then down the road a little bit further it's going to include a book. So we're really happy that you're here getting to know a little bit about manifesting inclusion today, but even more so we're excited that you're here to get some great pearls of wisdom from our guests. So without any further pause, I'm going to hand things over to our first guest, who is Nikiah Campbell, so that she can tell you a little bit more about herself.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am so excited to be here today. Um, it's interesting, right, when someone says, "Tell me about yourself." I think as I have spent the last few years on a career break, actually supporting my growing family and my two precocious toddlers, I've had to do a lot of rethinking about what it means when someone says, "Hey, introduce us, tell you who you are." The most salient identity that I hold is a toddler mom. And for those of you who have toddlers or have had toddlers, you can understand what I might be experiencing on the ins and outs of my days with a 2-year-old and 4-year-old. But I will say that what has brought me to this conversation and the work that brought me to higher ed started as a little girl on the south side of Chicago, where all I really wanted to do was be helpful. I wanted to help people. I wanted, even as at a young age, wanted to see people become their best selves and not be burdened or impacted by the challenges that were both internal and environmental. So fast forward to higher ed, a great portion of my work was in residence life and housing. And that's where I really got to embody all of the knowledge, skills, and abilities that I hold, having a background in counseling and having a passion for the 18 to 24-year-old population. I really got a chance to bring that all together and support staff and professional staff really figure out who they are, what they value, and how they want to show up in the world. Um, there are so many other things that I could share about myself, but I want to give us a chance to jump into the conversation, and I'm sure more things will emerge. But know that above all else, I'm super passionate about people. I'm super passionate about you being accountable to yourself and others. And I'm really, really, really excited about having a conversation about authenticity and how we show up for ourselves and how we show up for others.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nikiah. And now I'd like to pass the mic over to Demarcus Merritt for some words of introduction.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you're in the international territory and you're still just starting your day. Definitely, I echo Nikiah Campbell's sentiments of being just so appreciative to be in this like intentional space. Have a great deal of value for everybody on this screen, and I'm seeing people in the chat as well that UNCG was our common connection. How we cross paths for purpose and intentionality with each other. But I'm Demarcus Merritt Sr. I'm also one of my cellular identities is a father and a fiance. Hi, Ashley. Just had to get that out there. But a father of two. So I have a 7-year-old who's in second grade and spent some time with him yesterday at his school. And then we also have a 4-year-old who is very good at helping us to relearn life and what we think we know. So I'll leave that in there. So Tyler education is definitely a school in itself. But I come with 17 years of experience. Hard to believe I've been in higher ed that long, but it's as someone who was taught very early, had the privilege to have a parent teach me and show me that higher education definitely was a key, not exactly the key, but a key to really exploring and opening up your life for opportunities for yourself, but not only, but for others as well. I am very much an advocate for making space for others. And so that is a basis of why I exist in higher education and why I continue to persist with my identities and with my purpose and positionality. I am also a CEO and diversity doctor of the Demarcus Merritt Signature Experience, which provides transformative experiences just on inclusion, education, and just how do we be better humans, especially humanizing the people in the work. So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation, and I look forward to the engagement today.
Wonderful. I was just smiling as you were both talking about your 4-year-olds and thinking that, boy, there's nothing like a 4-year-old when you want to talk about authenticity. I have teenagers now, but I remember those 4-year-old days and just all the like burning questions about life, just right out there. Okay. So why don't we just start there, actually? Let's talk about what authenticity means to each of us. And so knowing that Nikiah and I both have had spent some time in training as counselors, I know that authenticity is something that is talked about a lot in counseling, but I also know that it has meanings apart from that space. So I wonder, Nikiah, if you could start and then we can go to Demarcus and just tell us, what does authenticity mean to you?
Sure. I think what's fascinating, I did a little bit of cursory research, and there are like 25,000 books written on authenticity. It's like, wow, well, apparently there aren't enough opinions out there. For me, authenticity is something that is a value that I hold true. I would actually label it as one of my top values. And I think for me, it's about how I show up in the world and my authentic self, but I also think it's knowing the audience that I want to connect with and knowing how people experience me. One of the things that I've always strived to do is to be very self reflective and be really thoughtful and intentional. Intentional is one of my favorite words about how I demonstrate my values in action, how my words and my actions align with who I feel God has called me to be and who I feel is the version of me that's here to enact my calling through my vocation. And I think when it comes to authenticity, one of the areas that you can struggle with, that I've struggled with, is that performative piece. It's when authenticity becomes when you're sometimes when you fake it till you make it, you're not helping yourself. So for me, being authentic is the truest, most at peace version of myself. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're authentic in all spaces with all people. I'm sure we'll get to that in a moment. But for me, when you are alone in a room and you are reflecting on who you are, what your values are, and how you want people to experience you, that person brings you peace. That version of you excites you. You should be excited about your authentic self, and you should have clarity about what it looks like, sounds like, behaves like to be that authentic version of yourself.
Go ahead, Demarcus.
I'm just sitting. I
Yeah.
snaps, claps. I'm trying to do everything. But I totally agree. And the only thing I would add is I've especially at this point in my life, definitely as a father, um, I think I've started to value authenticity as two things. One, as the journey and the destination. And so I think I began very early, especially in my career, in how my identity as a black man also kind of warped or competed with my identity as a higher education professional. And I often found kind of what Nikiah was sharing of like I found my identity shifting based on the space that I held, and I really started to cultivate like and sit with and make space to think through what does the authenticity of myself look like at its core being, and what is that foundation. And so the journey is I'm continually going on this journey understanding what my authenticity looks like and how it may shift from one space to another. But the ultimate destination is to get to a space where my salient identity is it is what it is, regardless of the space I'm in, regardless of the people I'm in. And then the second thing is I hold authenticity as a mirror. And oftentimes I'm looking back at myself and asking who am I and who I want to be and who I've been, to experience what that growth and understand what that growth is. But I've also recognized that in my authenticity mirror, I've also recognized other people pop up in that mirror. And so, how am I either paying attention to how they're showing up and then reflecting in who I am, or resisting how other people are showing up in my mirror to really focus on who I am in all again and being salient in all spaces. So I would also echo that it is very much a core value to me. I know it's kind of cliche when people say I am who I am, but truly, like I am who I am. I am becoming who I need to be.
Uh, Demarcus, let's pull into that a little for a second because we often think about power and privilege in the work that Dr. G and I do, not just from a student, professor slash faculty staff, but also hierarchy in staff. So both of you all have taken your careers to different heights, and we would love to hear about how you've navigated the authenticity specifically in the workplace. And when you think about that, how have you been able to what are some practices that maybe felt exclusive? And then what are some practices that really made you feel included? And we'll start with Nikiah and we'll hop over to Demarcus.
Sure. I think when you think about the workplace, you have to think about workplaces are current systems, right? Nothing is happening, in a silo. And people make up systems. So one of the, I think, zooming out for a second and remembering that um, my blackness, right? My blackness, my womanness requires me to be really skilled at reading the room. Like it could be literally life or death. My ability to read a room, understand the anatomy of the space, the anatomy of the workspace, how is it composed, who's in it, and you know what's safe. Literally safe, figuratively safe. So when you think about the workplace and you think about what are inclusive things that made me feel included, things that made me feel excluded. It's the exclusion is when you don't feel safe, you don't feel supported, you don't feel like you have the ability to just show up and not think about showing up, you know. Um, and I think for me, one of the things that has it's not only a part of my personality, but I think it's come with age, both biological age and just maturity in the field, that over time you gain confidence in how you show up. You know what you bring to the table as far as skills. And even in places and spaces where there are hierarchies and dynamics with other professionals, supervisors, you still know that you bring value to the table. So there's hopefully there's nothing that anyone can say that can call that into question. Once you have that confidence in self and what you bring to the table, I think it's a little bit easier to navigate those challenging conversations around authenticity. For me, if I know who I am and know that I am a value add to my department, to my organization, it's not going to be difficult for me to have a conversation when something occurs and I feel like I've been excluded. It's going to be a very honest conversation. I think for me, transparency and honesty are key. And when you share from an honest space, hey, I noticed something and I want to know if you noticed it too. And you share authentically, honestly, hopefully the person that you're talking to has the emotional maturity to be present and process what you're sharing and hold space for that. I think being times where I felt intentionally included, it's not even rocket science, some of this stuff. It's very basic things. As someone who is vegan, did you think about that when you ordered the food for the event? Did you think that there may possibly be different types of things that other people may eat? It's those little things that I think matter. And the ability to conceive and conceptualize that, hey, everyone may not be showing up the way I'm showing up, and let me be thoughtful about how all people may show up and how their needs may be met. That's being inclusive. And then exclusion is centering yourself in a way that feels like people need to get on how you get on or they need to get off. And obviously, that's not helpful. It doesn't allow people to thrive in those environments.
Thank you so much for that, Nikia. Demarcus, what do you have? And just to highlight, I really hear you on that piece of the hearing and the listening being the space where people can make improvements. So, what you got first, Demarcus?
Yeah, I've really connected with Nikia's mentioning and drawing a relationship between authenticity and safety. I think that is huge because oftentimes when I enter environments, especially work environments, I'm also engaging and it's really step by step, depending on how many people I know in the space or pre-existing relationships, all those things. But I'm really engaging the workplace as how much of myself do I trust you with? And when I trust you very little, then I'm very guarded and I'm not able to exercise vulnerability in a way that is probably necessary even for me to function as a human, but also to do the function of my job. Because I think there's also a connection between vulnerability and compassion. And so I think what I have been able to deem as exclusionary practice that I want to really bring light to as a Black man when I enter a space as an only. And unfortunately, when I've entered upper management, the more that I kind of climb this ladder of hierarchy or be in different leadership roles, they are few and far between practitioners that look like me. So now I am continually assessing the environment, right? And so that's why if as a Black man, I may look like I'm not engaged in the information, I'm not engaged in what's going on, but I am engaged. But I duly am also assessing the environment for the safety of my identity that I want to exercise. And so I have to do that because I've been in enough environments and I've seen enough examples where certain environments are not safe, right? And so I cannot afford to enter a unsafe environment and give you my full self, and then I'm the one left to pick up the pieces and put myself back together. I cannot continue to do that. And so on the opposite, where I've seen inclusive practices or inclusive, I really want to get to belonging, right? I think that's what really, where do I belong? And I oftentimes when I'm my visual belonging is what really kind of centers me and grasps me and makes me feel like I'm a part of an environment, whether it's work or home or social or whatever the case may be. And so I've started to pay more attention and be more in tune about what does that visual belonging look like. So now, whereas that is a different Maslow's need for me as far as that belonging, I think also now I try to create those spaces. So I insert myself into spaces so people that look like me can say, you know what, there is somebody else that looks like this. And so whereas I may not be offered that belonging and offered that safety, I want to be that safety for others in the spaces. So that's actually why this and continue to persist in higher ed. It is to interrupt inadequate spaces, but interrupt the collegiate environment, which was not designed for Black and Brown folks, with the Black and Brown folks in mind. So I want to rewrite the narrative. I want to challenge the status quo and rewrite the norm, and bring attention to how we can be better. So I'm going to hold space. I'm going to take up space, which, as Nikiah said, it takes time to grow in that journey. I did not start off as a vocal mouthpiece for these type of topics and these type of things, but it's become very centered to me. And so even in my interviews now, which can be a very challenging space to navigate your identity in an interview space, because like, do I show up as me because that's who you're going to get every day, or do I show up who I believe you want to at least get my foot in the door, to then start to evaluate the spaces that I can show up fully me and fully be authentic. So I think it is a journey, and we need to really consider how we are either being open or close doors for people to be fully authentic.
Thank you both so much. I really was just appreciative of the chance to sit back and hear what you were offering there. So important. And it really made me, reflect a lot about myself as a white person, and, all the additional layers of work that you both just described in terms of coming into a space, assessing it, being able to read the room, being able to see, like, am I the only? Are there more folks like me? Do I need to therefore, try to hold not just space for myself, but think about others who might, be coming beyond me? Just the, how do I present myself in interviews? And so, for people who don't have to do that kind of daily work, I think it's what a gift you have given us to help us think about what that requires. And, we only have so much energy in each given day. And so in addition to being, parents and being coworkers, to being, humans in the world, all this additional energy it takes just to be assessing and evaluating for your safety, for your chance of belonging. And so I want to just ask, like, if there are white folks like me who identify as white logged on today, to kind of challenge us all to be more thoughtful about what does our authenticity look like? Does it look like just coasting into a room and assuming everything is safe, everything is good, this space is set up for me, and I'm just gonna, take this space that was like made for me? Or does our authentic selves mean that if we're looking for manifesting inclusion, does it mean I need to tap into something more than just myself as a white person? I need to think about myself as a human who would want to have my voice heard, and therefore Demarcus wants to have his voice heard, and Nikiah wants to have her voice heard. Or think about myself as a parent, and that I want a world that is safe and welcoming to my child, just as Demarcus and just as Nikiah want those things. So I really want us, folks with any kind of sort of power and privilege that society has handed us, to be very thoughtful about what does it mean for us to show up authentically, and to be cautious that we're not stepping on other people's, space and rightful belonging by doing that. So I'm sorry for that big long soliloquy. Didn't want to take up that much space, but I just felt that's what was in my heart in response to what I heard you all saying. Is there anything else that you would want to suggest to me or to folks like me as we think about being in educational spaces? So, like, especially, historically white or predominantly white institutions, how can we be more thoughtful and make space not only for our own authenticity, but for that of other folks to show up and be fully present? I don't know who wants to start that, but either one is welcome to jump in.
I think one thing that I appreciate that you just did was, I love what you just shared, Laura. And then I love that you ended it with, I just took up some space, didn't I? And I acknowledge that. And I think that's part of the conversation. I think sometimes we feel like we need to show up as faculty, as staff, perfect. We need to have these perfect ways that we say things and these perfect ways that we try to communicate with staff and students and try to make them feel included. And some of this is very messy. Some of these conversations are challenging. Sometimes you're not going to have the right words, but you just got to start talking and get there. And if you're thoughtful and respectful and intentional, the impact will match the intent, right? So I think when thinking about other things that I would suggest is that folks have to remember one, who is in the room? The generation of students that are being served right now, the traditionally aged students that are being served right now and on our college campuses is not who was there when I was there 20 years ago. Is not who was there when some of our faculty were there 40 and 50 years ago, right? So be thoughtful about who are you actually engaging with? What do they value, both individually and as a generation, as a culture, as a community on your campus? Sometimes sometimes we want this work to be easy and it's just not. We need to be really thoughtful about how do I have both group and individual conversations, understand what individual people value, understand what's meaningful for this student, and how what makes a difference for this student, this person in front of me. Um, and some of that requires our own vulnerability. And I'll end with that. I think with a counseling background, we take all these classes about self-disclosure, and you got to be really intentional about what you share and what you don't share and how you share it and all that. You got to share. You're gonna have to say some stuff. You're gonna have to demonstrate with boundaries, of course, that you can be vulnerable, that you can share your own experiences, that you can make a connection, that you can empathize, not sympathize, but actually empathize with the students that you're trying to create this environment for. And if you do that in a genuine, authentic way, then those students feel heard, those staff feel heard. Um, and it's not something that you're just going to pick up a book and be able to do. It takes time, it takes practice, and it takes the willingness to make mistakes until you get it right.
And two things I'll quickly add to the, the expert nature that Kia shared is it's a privilege not to think about your privilege, right? And so I think having more authentic allies, um, a spending time in space, whether you put it on your calendar, and I don't mean in a public space, I mean in private, closed doors, because I don't need to see the work you're doing, out because I'll be able to see the work you're doing if that makes sense. And so I think spending more time to privilege because I've seen so much rhetoric of people, particularly white identifying people, resisting that they don't have privilege, and it's like, well, you're counterproductive to a that's false, but you're also counterproductive to actually being an ally. So you can't tell me I don't have privilege, but also say I'm an ally for Black Lives Matter. Uh, those are two constant. Those are two conflicting statements. But then the other piece I think is um, being mindful of how we self-identify as an advocate. Right? I think true organic advocates, authentic advocates, it's in the work. Like they are identified, they don't self-identify. So I'll just leave it there.
I want to add a comment to that. I think what I often see from folks is that we go from this space of, well, as white people over here doing work for minority folks, often of people of color, from people of different level of disabilities, and then y'all do y'all work, and then we sometimes benefit from that work. But sometimes what I don't always see is that intercultural conversation first of like, well, what do y'all need? And I always think about it as like a kid, right? Like I hope to be a mother one day. But if my kid is crying, our natural inkling is to say, what's the matter? What the matter? But we don't do that with people, big people. And I don't know how we lose that level of cognizance and emotional needs. But one of the things I can also I want to give space for is that's why events like this are important. Dr. G, you're going to be able to say things that I can never say with my black self, right? And on the contrast, there are things and ways that you could advocate that I'll never be able to even enter the room for. And so we all have a piece in making this space more inclusive. And I want to dig on that in a second. Often we talk about university campuses, faculty, and staff needing to create ways of inclusion on college campuses or in K through 12. What are some tools or initiatives that Demarcus and Nikiah, y'all have seen that are super beneficial to the community? So, is it a male achievement program? Was it an actual budget line? Was it a committee that was paid and compensated extra for their work? But what are some of those tangibles that we can start thinking about systems and structures around to be successful? And I'll go Nikiah and then Demarcus.
Sure. I mean, I've seen so many wonderful things in my career. I think so. I know Demarcus will hit on higher ed, so I'll talk about some higher ed adjacent things. I think working in the nonprofit sector, you get to see things a little bit differently, and even higher ed adjacent. Um, the idea of affinity groups, right? Opportunities for folks with shared backgrounds to come together and have conversations about how they're experiencing environments, I think is really important. Um, while no group is a monolith, there are some common threads in the things that we experience. And I think I've appreciated when space, time, and budget, right? Because you money shows where you value, right? So when you have groups where you're allowed to come together, where you it's a safe space, however you want to define that, to come together and have conversations, not just about what brings you all together, which is the work that you're doing together, but how your other identities kind of intersect with that. We are not one thing. And I think I've appreciated group spaces like affinity groups where it's allowed you to take that predominant identity and use that as a connection to see what other ways are we all working together and experiencing things the same or differently, and how then can we support each other. Beyond that, there's so many programs out there that are so well intentioned, but maybe the impact isn't what we need it to be. So I think in a perfect world in higher ed, you have programs like male initiative programs or um, like women in STEM, like those Black women in STEM, like those types of programs in theory are really great, right? But they're not great if they are not creating opportunities to then leverage those experience and launch those folks into something else, right? Because it's not helpful if you just bring us together, give us a budget, we just keep in and we're not actually talking about anything that's getting us to the next. What's the next? So I think when I think about programs that are truly successful, it's they have an infrastructure, right? Well, it's built out over years. They're bringing folks in, they're helping the students, in this case, college students, they're helping the students to network and make connections with people so that there's a after I graduate, here's an internship, here's an opportunity, here, let me put you in position so that you can continue to build relationships because this isn't the destination. This male initiative, this program for marginalized populations, this isn't the it. This is the vehicle that we're trying to use to get you to graduation and then beyond. Um, so I can think of 100 programs that are trying to do that. But I challenge those of us in the audience who are stewards of programs like that to be really thoughtful about what exactly am I doing and am I helping these students to get to the next. And I'll let Demarcus wrap it up.
No, that's I mean that's so applicable to the community based and campus based, right? I've known and had the experience, had the opportunity to be a part of some wonderful initiative that are affinity spaces, but do have good foundation and good purpose and good results. But I echo Nikia's sentiments that sometimes it can be a cycled system because that collegiate experience is an elevated and almost faux pas of you have, as a black man, as a black male student, you're supported. You feel you have mentors, you have access, you have privilege. But then you graduate, and now the world does not look like the past 4 or 5 years you just experienced. And so now you have to reset your reality, and where are your resources? And so I think there has to be a better relationship between that higher educational experience, because even that platform is a privilege and access in itself, but also what is the global experience of based on what your identities are. And I think there's just a strong disconnect. I think as higher ed, we can do better with preparation, with truth telling, with making space for narrative sharing to really understand. I know when I was at Florida, Dr. V. Bird, I think she's in Kentucky now, but she had a Black Male Initiative that was truly phenomenal, because they didn't just show up and laugh or just attend a football game or a sporting event together. They learned skills that will propel them in life, from changing a tire to how to measure yourself, get how to attend a suit shop to get yourself measured and know your measurements, how to show up in an interview as your authentic self, but also ask questions to know how you're going to be supported as a black man. All these skill set. Also, my good brother CJ Johnson, who is a founder of the King's Collector, who's getting off the ground now, of supporting men of color in housing. He had the Black Male Initiative, NC State, phenomenal initiative, because it is literal preparation, not just for the college experience. It's helping these young men think about life after college and getting them engaged in experiences. So the reality is that much more actual before they get in. Some other things I've seen is barbershop talks, where, because the barbershop is such a cultural staple within the black community, particularly in the black male community, where it's basically you're getting a cut and you're getting fresh and getting lined up, but you're also therapy. Like, I can tell you the amount of trust I have for my barber, first, because I close my eyes and let them use a razor on my face. But second of all, because I feel at such a comfort space with them. I've talked about, preparing for marriage. I've talked about kids. I've talked about my educational journey. I've talked about these things, and they've shared their life stories with me. And so I've seen these conversations happen. So one of the things I would employ that, and Dr. Brown McGowan was a champion of this when he was at UNCG, is for institutions to consider study what's already working, and how do we bring that experience to the campus. Now, bring it and support it. Don't bring it and monetize it in a way that exploits the culture. So there's a very fine line with that. And again, I can't drive Nikiah's point that she made earlier home enough, is truly what is life preparation like? What is that going to be? What do they need? And we need to talk and lean into the students, because what I needed as a black male, as an 18-year-old many moons ago, is different than what an 18-year-old today needs. So we need to also be collaborative in our approach when we're building these spaces, and be vulnerable enough to say, hey, we tried that did not work. Right. And voicing that to the community that we are trying to serve, and say, hey, that didn't work. We need your help. We need your input. And being able to bring them in as thought partners to be able to facilitate these spaces. Because if you build something and it's sustainable, it has resources, we all know the thing. You want to know what's important to an institutional organization, check their calendar and check their checkbook. If you're not spending time, you're not creating space, that is not a priority or institutional value. So we have to rethink. And some of these initiatives, unfortunately, are performative. They look good. They're bringing in grant money, but that grant money is truly not serving the population it's supposed to serve. It is supplemental income for some other need in the university, and the actual community is still struggling. So I just employ for us as practitioners and as just humans to really do inventory in what are we doing in the purpose platforms that we are creating. Are they truly servicing the populations that they need to serve? And how can we do better for sustainable work? Because what happens is, I am passionate about black male issues, but then I leave the institution. So the commitment shouldn't leave with me. So we need to shift from individual commitment to an institutional commitment. And that has to take much more effort and much more intentionality.
Thank you so much for that, Demarcus and Nikiah. You all have dropped more gems than in a diamond mine today. We really appreciate that. In a moment, we're going to be moving over to some question and answer. And so we want to give you all some time to interact with our lovely panelists. We know that we've had a number of comments that folks have said, just so glad to catch you. We love this conversation, dropping that realness. That's what Pierre, aka husband, said today. But as we're thinking about our questions, we also want to take a moment to observe a moment of silence for those who have lost their lives, those who are currently struggling through battles in their lives, and observance of our current world climate. So we'll take a second for that. If you have any questions or comments, please drop them in the chat and we'll answer your questions in a moment. Thank you all so much. Dr. G, what we got?
Let's see. As far as questions, or let's see. I'm just going to scroll through and highlight some of the thoughtful remarks that people have shared. In addition to the general appreciation for UNCG community, um, there were some comments about George Still, who has been a frequent member of our audience, and so we appreciate him very much. I can't even summarize the very thoughtful comment that he made, but it was about thinking about, practices that have been constructed in spaces like PWIs that then maybe shift and become like UNCG, which is now federally designated as a minority serving institution, or Dr. Still was talking about a Hispanic serving institution. But when places have started and been kind of grown from the historical practices of being a predominantly or historically white institution, we can't blame students if we bring them into that space and then it doesn't feel authentic to them, and they maybe are brave enough to tell us so. And so I just appreciated that perspective shared by Dr. Still. Also some people underscoring what Demarcus said about not being performative, and that the barbershop talk is real. So thank you, everyone who's been following along and sharing their thoughts. We do have a question from Ashley Owens, and that is, how do you approach authenticity when developing relationships as a supervisor? So there's that additional wrinkle of power between supervisors and those they supervise. Do you want to start, Demarcus?
Sure. It was my southern in me to allow Nikiah to go first. But I think very quickly, one of the things that I've had to learn and relearn and then unlearn and relearn again is having that foundation of authenticity matters a lot in the relationship dynamics of supervision, because again, one of the things I had to quickly dispel was that my mother's always taught me you treat everybody the same, and that is false. I don't mean to call my mother a liar. I've never said this to her face, but we have had to have some conversation. I had to understand that we cannot treat everybody the same, because everybody doesn't have the same needs, and everybody doesn't learn the same. And so I think when developing a relationship as a supervisor, I really want to get to know the person as a human. I'm not talking about the job. I'm not talking about the expectations. I don't want to know. Before I can know any of that, I need to know, who are you as a human? What are you bringing? What is your baggage? Who was your last supervisor? I remember specifically when I was at UNCG, though, I think I was in my third or fourth year, where we went through CRL assignments, and I realized this is the first time in my career as a supervisor I had all white staff members. And one of the things I talked to them in that first meeting, have you ever been supervised by a black man? So I think we have to be brave and vulnerable enough at the same time to bring identity in the supervisory conversation. And probably all of them were shared hey, I've never been asked that, but also I don't know. Okay, so we need to jump in this car together and we're going to explore what this looks like, because I also need to know if you were supervised by a black man. For me, I want to say I'm not him. I am him, but I'm not him. But the other piece is I need to understand that culturally we understand each other differently. How we communicate matters. And so as we develop this co-relationship, it takes the supervisee and the supervisor to understand our identities are going to be wrapped into our relationships. But also, we need to understand that I try to consciously think about what my power dynamic is as a black man. I don't think I have an option not to think about that, particularly when my supervisee does not look like me. But I also think there are some times that I had to learn how to let them in. And I started off my career, particularly in mid level management, thinking that I had to keep my supervisees at bay and say I couldn't tell them about my family life or what I did on the weekend or things that I was interested in, and it became a very sterile relationship. And they were very sterile to me, and so one-on-ones were very hard, and so I had to unlearn that. It's like and my mentor said, you got to let them in at some point. You don't have to tell them all your business, but let them have something that says, hey, I'm a human too. And so how am I also humanizing myself in this supervisor relationship? So I think it is very important that we talk about authenticity, because what I also realize is those that I'm supervising typically are also exploring what that looks like. So we have that dual conversation and make space. I learned at UNCG to flip the script when it came to my one-on-ones. I used to talk business first, but then in my second year there, I start asking, hey, how are you? Who are you? In the beginning of the conversation, so we don't go 45 minutes all business and then it's only 10 minutes left for me to tell you how you doing and you tell me you just had 2 horrible on-call nights. We should have started with that, because the rest of the stuff I can get to. So I think it's just really trying to center and being conscious of the power dynamic, but also figuring out how do I show up and how do I make space for myself and my identities, and also how do I do the same for my staff member, and to humanize them in the role and outside of the role as well.
You all want me to jump in on that, or you want to hit some more questions? Okay, I can add something really quickly. Echo everything that Demarcus said. I also think when you think about being a supervisor, not everyone has been mentored and raised in student affairs in the same way, right? And I think that mentorship I have observed recently looks a little bit different than it did when I was coming up in student affairs. So part of what you have to do in that authenticity piece is do some level setting, right? Making sure that you understand as a supervisor, like, what does your supervisor bring to the table? What do they want out of the relationship? Because some people assume that if you're my supervisor, you're my mentor. Those are the same things, and they are not. So if you thought that, please unthink that, because that is not the case. So I think when you approach authenticity in the supervisory relationship, you really need to make sure that you understand, what does your supervising need from you, what's being said and not being said, and how can you make sure that you all are on the same page so that you can build that supervisory relationship with a strong foundation.
Thank you both. You all are reminding me of a chapter we have coming out in our book that's about conflict and supervisory relationships. And I think you all are talking about like the productive, constructive side of making those strong, open relationships. And then the chapter also explores like what happens when relationships get off on the wrong foot and then you have to fix them a little bit. But so here's another great question from the chat. Darren Jenkins asked, how do you hold university leadership accountable to DEI initiatives when it seems like DEI is no longer a priority at your institution? And we know even here in North Carolina, there's a lot of this going around. So not just in North Carolina. So thoughts, either of you can start about sort of if DEI is an authentic value of an individual or of a unit, how do we then convey our assessment to university leadership of how they're doing on that?
I'm actually doing a keynote in a couple of weeks talking about this very topic. And one of the things I will say as a professional, one of the health first practices that I've tried to implement is being mindful not to always take professional decisions personal, because there's so many layers. Right now, there's a legislative war against DEI, right? And so we're seeing so many changes where we don't always see the strings attached to certain decisions, but we literally are seeing whole DEI offices close, positions being sunsetted permanently, and funding being threatened. And I think that's when it hit home for me, is because now the financial stability for our student experience is is in jeopardy. Should we use the word diversity? Should we use the word equity, inclusion, any of that? That we need to. My advice to Darren and to anyone in that particular position: continue to do the work, figure out ways to do the work. Your impact still matters, whether on an individual or institutional levels. When you continue to do the work, because what's interesting is legislation told us not to do DEI, but they didn't tell us how to still do the work. So there was no resolution offer, only restrictions. And so continue to do your work, make your impact, and at some point, also legislation changes all the time. It's just so unstable. But so I would just continue to be encouraged. What you do matters, and so the work still matters to our students. So I think whether it's a one-on-one or taking a student to coffee just to hear their narrative, it really matters, and it is doing the work regardless if the institution has shifted its priority.
Awesome. We actually have one more question. And so I wonder, would it be okay, Nikiah, if I throw this last question over your way? Okay. So Pierre Campbell asked, what advice would you give? Is there a Campbell connection here? So Pierre asked, what advice would you give to a young professional who wants to be authentic in the workplace, but their authenticity is challenging their leadership in a negative way? So maybe not being received. What
Yeah,
advice?
wow. Um, so in order to give good advice, I would have many more follow-up questions. But I think in general, I'll say um, we need some data, right? We need to understand what exactly is challenging the leadership in the negative way. And part of that conversation is going to involve one or two trusted folks to be in a very vulnerable conversation with. Sometimes when folks are experiencing us negatively and we can't make sense of it, it's because we're in our own bodies. And we need to involve people that we trust that can be the mirror that we hold up to ourselves and say, okay, this is what I'm trying to do. This is how I'm being experienced. There are many dynamics that are possibly at play in that situation. And ultimately, two things could be happening. You could be bringing your full self to work, and that's who you want to bring to work, and it's just not what the culture can support. Or you're bringing your full self to work, and maybe you shouldn't be bringing all of yourself to work. Um, Not everyone gets the gift of all of you in all spaces. Sometimes you need to hold a little bit of you to yourself or to your friends or to your family, and maybe that's not a part of you that should be a part of the work environment. You're still authentic. It's just you don't bring all of you. You bring the parts that matter in that space. So I would challenge that person to be reflective, be honest, be in conversation with people they trust. And once they get that data, make some really reflective decisions about if that's an environment that they can be successful in.
Demarcus and Nikiah, this has been such a beautiful conversation today. If you all have enjoyed this conversation, we just ask that you drop some love, some hearts, anything to us in the chat today. Let our lovely panelists know that you have enjoyed this. As well, we have two upcoming talks. We're doing this every single week until the end of 2024, and then hopefully in 2025. So if you're excited about joining us, if you want a part two of this conversation, please drop that in the chat. But please come back and join us. It is now Hispanic Heritage Month, and we want to talk about the pressing issues that's happening right now. There's a lot of conversation about borders and who belongs and who doesn't belong, as if we can go to Mars if we wanted to. So what we're going to do is talk about how to build inclusive environments for Latinx folks, and specifically for students, faculty, and staff. Last but not least, we want to share some beautiful love here for Demarcus and Nikiah. So, Demarcus and Nikiah, please share with us where we can find you, how we can engage with you, and maybe a little bit about your business and where we can engage with your consulting.
Sure. Hi. I am so elated about the work that I'm able to do with my consulting company. For those of you who don't know, I'm still very excited about being in the field of student affairs. But bigger than that, I'm just really excited about being very reflective about what God has called me to do. And that looks like being my authentic self in lots of different spaces. So returning to formal higher ed is something that I would be open to, but I'm also open to being lots of things in lots of spaces. My main energy right now is focused on my consulting work. You can find my consulting website link on my LinkedIn page. And I just really want to work and serve with anyone who is trying to do and be better. My goal is to help folks, problems big and small, get past the barriers that are keeping them from realizing their truest potential and just simply getting out of your own way. My favorite thing is accountability. So if you are on the goal struggle bus, come on over. I can help.
And I'll jump in. As I shared before, I am the current assistant director for Belonging Engagement at George Mason. So, looking forward and joining my colleagues here to do some very intentional work on what belonging means and what it looks like, and also how does it become a belonging as a culture and not a consequence. And so, I'm looking forward to that work, but I also operate as the CEO and diversity doctor of the Demarcus Merritt Signature Experience, where I offer consulting, transforming experiences through workshops, presentation, also do research and assessment. And it's really at the root of it is just professional impact with a personal touch. And so what we're looking to do is really just help organizations or help individuals be able to understand barriers that may exist, help see barriers that exist that they may not see, but how to build a formula and build a strategy that ultimately allows them to operate in a better, humanized, and more inclusive way. So you definitely can contact me on Twitter at DM underscore UR Future Prayers. That's with a Z. Or you can contact me at am.demarcus@gmail.com. And I would love to connect with you all. Thank you all so much for this space. Thank you, Nikiah, for your drop gems of wisdom. I will be reflective. We might need to do a re-up. We might need a part two because this definitely is a critical conversation. I appreciate Laura and Lee for you all for creating this platform and making sure that we were able to contribute in a very intentional way today.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to be a part of these kinds of talks, be in a like minded community, please connect with us at manifestinginclusion@gmail.com. If you would like to be a speaker, especially, or if you would just like to join our community, learn more about our book project, help us manifest the world of inclusion, please follow us on LinkedIn at Manifesting Inclusion. Once again, my name is Lee Miles. I'm joined here by Dr. Laura Gonzalez, Demarcus Merritt, and Nikiah Campbell, and we are just so grateful to have you. We'll see you next week at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Have a great day, folks.